I was expected to go to the University of Washington and marry the girl next door, have a couple kids, work in a local firm, and then die.
That might have been the plan, John, but you went down a very different path.
I did, and it all happened almost by accident. I was so clumsy I couldn't really defend myself. So middle school and high school, I was bullied badly and really furious about it, and wanting to be stronger and tougher. It was a classic male search for manhood. And then I happened to get a job as a crew member of a cargo ship going to the Far East and back. The summer, I was just 17 years old. It all began the first night. Some crewman comes up to me on deck, and he starts making, sexual advances. And another crew, a huge black guy named Roy from the engine room, must have been 60 pounds. He grabs his first man, beats the shit out of it, and there was a magnificent stream of discussion. I'd never seen violence, and I sat there with my eyes open, understanding that this is what it was to be a man. You had to be strong and tough like Roy. The only faith I had was faith in myself, that I was indestructible. And about God, well, I remember when I survived the near drowning in the McKinley River, coming back from that mountain climb. And I was beaten up because I'd been knocked out on the bottom of the river. And I remember laying on that riverbank saying, what the hell? This is about the 10th time that I have survived a near miss. Why, when so many other young men are getting killed, I'm not getting killed? Why is that? Why is that? And I began to raise that question. It was a backdrop for all of my subsequent adventures.
John Graham, welcome to Bold Journeys. You know, I am so excited to have a chance to chat with you again. Your book is called Quest, Risk, Adventure, and the Search for Meaning. And that, John, that kind of describes Bold Journeys, the podcast, of what I really set out to do with this podcast. So it's just so fitting to have you on the show to talk about your life. And I really enjoyed your book. It was so well written, John. You're quite a good writer, which you displayed your writing skills pretty early on, which is part of your story, actually. But again, just so great to see you again, and thank you for coming on the show.
Oh, thank you for those kind words. Writing that book was a real labor of love in some cases. In some cases, it was like $100,000 or $1 million worth of therapy to get that deep into my life, and especially the downsides of my life, the rabbit holes I went down, the mistakes I made. It was like a very interesting and long-term project. But thank you for reading it, and thank you for your compliments. I wrote it a lot. I rewrote it a lot, and I had some help with people out here on Whidbey Island, professional writers.
You know, I bet it was therapeutic, John. My brother went through an exercise of writing some of his memoirs, and he was telling me how therapeutic it was for him to do it, and just kind of going over some troubles we had growing up, you know, and issues with our dad and things like that. Kind of similar to what you went through. Not the same story, but just kind of walking through it that can help writing about it. And maybe we can just start, John, with your roots growing up in Tacoma. You know, I grew up about an hour north of you in Renton. I was born in the 60s, so I was a little bit later than you. But just starting out, what was it like growing up in Tacoma back in the 40s and 50s?
Well, it was like a classic American small city. Not much ever happened in Tacoma when I was growing up. It was like one of those TV dramas of the 50s where, mom, dad, two kids, and a dog. Uh, and it was, so I was, nothing ever happened. Nothing ever happened in my family. I was expected to go to the University of Washington and marry the girl next door, have a couple kids, work in a local firm, and then die. I mean, that's what it was I was headed for. The thing
Well,
is,
that
is
might
that,
have been the plan, John, but you went down a very different path.
I did, and it all happened quite by almost by accident. I was bullied badly because I grew so much so fast. I was so clumsy, I couldn't really defend myself. So, middle school and high school, I was bullied badly and really furious about it, and wanting to be stronger and tougher. It was a classic male search for manhood. Only for me, it was driven by being bullied. And I knew I needed role models. I loved my dad, of course, but he was a very gentle guy. He was bullied himself, shoved aside for promotions, et cetera, so he was no model. And then I happened to get a job as a crew member of a cargo ship going to the Far East and back. The summer, I was just 17 years old, and so all of a sudden, I'm grabbed from this placid little environment, Tacoma, Washington. So anyway, I go down to San Francisco on board this ship. The very first night, the ship leaves San Francisco. The very first night, one of the crewmen. Now, mind you, these are not container ships, not in 1959. These are just big boats, and they're run by 50 or 60 really tough guys with muscles and tattoos and stuff. And these tough guys took one look at this scrawny kid from Tacoma, Washington, and they were determined that I was going to learn life lessons that summer that I would never get in Tacoma. And they didn't disappoint. But in any case, it all began the first night. Some crewman comes up to me on deck, and he starts making, sexual advances. And another crew, a huge black guy named Roy from the engine room, must have weighed 250, 60 pounds. He grabs his first man, shoves him up against the kid, beats the shit out of him. And there was a magnificent stream of cussing. I'd never heard cussing like that. I'd never seen violence. And I sat there with my eyes open, understanding that this is what it was to be a man. Uh, it was you had to be strong and tough like Roy. I went down to my cabin that night and I practiced beating someone up against the mirror and trying to cuss like Roy was cussing because I now understood what it was to be a man, it was to be violent. Um, and then the summer in the Far East, I mean, it was like going to big cities, Yokohama, Manila, whatever. We were, down in the jungles of the Philippines picking up coconut, and so there were barroom brawls, all kinds. I didn't realize the world was that big. I didn't realize the world was that colorful, or dangerous for that matter. I mean, it was like my mouth was open the whole time, and I loved it. I said, "This is not Tacoma. This is the real world." And, guys like Roy are what it is to be a man. So when I came back from that 3-month trip, I came back a completely changed young man. I was then 17 years old, I realized that what I wanted was a whole lifetime, like that 3 months on the ship, the Golden Bear was
And that, John,
so
that was such a life-changing event for you. That set the trajectory of the next almost 20 years of your life seeking adventures. And didn't you win that trip in a writing contest?
I did. I mean, it was like, uh, I was, as you say, I was a pretty decent writer. The full story is, um, I entered a writing contest and won it, and the prize for the writing contest was a trip on a freighter as a passenger to the Far East and back. Shipping company had made some kind of screw up, and they told my parents that they had mistakenly booked all their accommodations for the whole summer. Now, freighters only had about room for about 12 or 15 passengers, so, that was it. So I complained. The prize was a trip on a freighter all the way to the Far East and back, um, and wanna go. Well, then they offered me a trip just out to Guam and back, and I complained about that as well. And they ended up saying, "Okay," talking to my mother, "Okay, Mrs. Graham, what we'll do is we can make John a member of the crew. We'll give him a soft job, and he can bunk with a member of the crew because we have space in the crew accommodation." So that's how I became a member of the crew of the Golden Bear. It was by winning a contest, an essay contest And then this weird combination of events that, put me in the cruise quarters with a job as a seaman instead of of traveling to the Far East and back as a passenger as if it was a cruise ship. So that's how it happened, and it
John,
wasn't
it
funny.
reminds me of the press crew members, like the Royal Navy would go out to the bars and find people to
I hadn't thought
take
about
onto the ship as crew.
I didn't I wasn't dragoon. I was I loved it. And my mother, of course, almost didn't let me go.
Yeah.
Wasn't stupid, and she knew that a cargo ship run by 50 or 60 really tough guys, would present all kinds of things that the Catholic Church, we were a Catholic family, my mother was a staunch Catholic, would present what the Catholics call the near occasions of sin, and so she went to the local pastor, priest, and he said, "Oh, Madeline, you can't let John go because, these ships are full of sin and, they'll be bad examples for him, whatever." Lucky for me, my mother was basically, and I love her for this, and I don't say it negatively, was basically a Croatian peasant immigrant from her family immigrated from Croatia, at the turn of the century. And so she was beset with 2 difficult parts of her decision. Should I not go, and therefore be saved from the near occasions of sin? And by the way, I really hoped that I would be in the middle of near occasions of sin. That was the whole point. But I said to my mother, "Oh, no, 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 no. I'll be will be able." On the other hand, my mother also had to weigh the fact that she came from this Croatian peasant family where all of my uncles, her brothers, were also big tough guys, and they took all kinds of risks. They were, I really looked up to some of my uncles, and so my mother decided, bless her heart, to let me go on this trip, and so that's how I got permission from my mother. My father thought it was a good idea. It wasn't no problem for him. So that's how I got on the Golden Bear. I won an essay contest. The shipping company made a mistake. Maybe a member of the crew, my Catholic mother, bent her Catholicism to let me go on a trip which she knew would present me with all kinds of terrible temptations. Uh, and I found myself on the deck of this freighter heading for the Far East.
What a great adventure, John, but you had so many more adventures after that that are just all like increasingly amazing and even near death experiences. I love the next one. You basically hitchhiked in Europe. You ended up in Algeria during a revolution. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, a few years after the Golden Bear. Now, mind you, I told my parents when I came off the Golden Bear that I wanted to quit high school and be a seaman, and they, of course, put their foot down. No, 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 no. Uh, uh, I finished high school and then got into Harvard. And that very first summer, um, I was hitchhiking on a student charter flight to Europe, and everybody else was, going to Paris, London, and looking in, museums and stuff, but not me. I began by hitchhiking through East Germany at the height of the Cold War, which was a real adventure, walking on the other side of the Berlin Wall with all of these nasty German soldiers yelling at me. Um, but I got through that fine, and that was an adventure. I didn't really realize it because the Cold War was at height, and the Cuban Missile Crisis was only like weeks away. Uh, but anyway, I got down to a youth hostel in Zermatt because I wanted to climb the Matterhorn. I was now like, oh yeah, 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 and I was rowing crew for Harvard, so I put on some muscle and was no longer bullyable. But anyway, I'm at the youth hostel in Zermatt, having climbed the Matterhorn. I look in the local newspaper and it says there's a war going on just south in Algeria. The rebels are, uh, the rebels are, trying to take over the country from the French colonials, and I said, "Oh, it's only a couple 100 miles away. I'd never been in a war before. I mean, the Golden Bear was fun, that was great, but it wasn't a war. This is a war." So I hitchhiked down to Spain, hitchhiked through Morocco, and got to the Algerian border, and, there were no border guards because, after all, it was the middle of a war. So I walked across the border, and luckily, I was smart enough to put an American flag on my shoes, so the rebels wouldn't shoot Frenchmen. And so I walked into Algeria in the middle of this Revolutionary War, this anti-colonial war. I needn't have worried. The rebels were pretty nice to me. I mean, they would stop cars going at my direction at gunpoint and tell the driver to take me where I wanted to go. So I hitchhiked through the war in Algeria, and I went to both sides. I stayed 3 days, for example, with a bunch of French foreign engineers who were some of the last Frenchmen to leave Algeria in orders for the France losing war. And these French legionnaires were just like the Germans, the Golden Bear, the ship. They were big and tough with muscle tattoos, and they were also determined to give me life lessons. So I hung out with the French Foreign Legionnaires because they ran the power plant in Iran. Every night they were getting shot at, and they were trying to hold off the whole rebel army with a couple of pistols and shotguns, and they were so brave, and I was so enamored of them. Yes, again, this is a second lesson. This is what it is to be a man. Um, and so everything became a continuation of that experience. I went to movies of John Wayne and other manly exemplars of manhood of the day. Read books all about real men doing real adventures. I was determined then not just to exercise, not just to be in the middle and watch these adventures, but to be an adventurer myself. And like I say, I rode through, so I put on like 30 pounds of muscle, and I was 6.5 feet tall, so nobody messed with me. So my life ahead as an adventurer was set. The year after the episode in Algeria, I was with a team from Harvard that made the first direct descent of the north wall of Mount McKinley, and it was incredibly dangerous because of the avalanches falling down that wall, and so nobody had even climbed because it was so dangerous. We made the first descent, and it was, in fact, incredibly dangerous. Avalanches near missing us on the right, near missing us on the left, rock falls, crevasses, climbing steep, difficult ice cliffs. It took us 38 days to get to the top.
38 days. And
And that,
John, the
yeah,
the equipment you had back then, I mean, it's not like modern mountain climbing equipment of what you guys were dealing with. And you
no,
had to,
we made a lot of it ourselves, Rod.
did you?
We made the snowshoes by steel tubing and whatever we used for the snowshoes from a hardware store. We made our own tents. Well, I mean, we were college kids. We didn't have budget. Uh, so we made a lot of equipment and got a lot of it from Army surplus. Uh, about the only thing that we splurged on were good quality mountain climbing boots and down parkas. The rest of it we made ourselves. So it was a really on the cheap expedition. It cost us a couple $100 a piece at most. And then when we made that back writing stories afterward, because when we finished this climb, it was like famous. Not only that, I must say that before we started, everybody, including skilled mountaineers, said it was suicidal. And the manager of the McKinley Park Hotel, which was the last stop before you started marching across the country towards the mountain, was a pretty nasty guy, and he made a public bet that if we came back alive, he would give us all the steak dinners we could eat. So when we did come back, having survived the last of the adventure, I almost drowned in the McKinley River. Um, we stopped in his restaurant and took him up on that bet. 2 steak dinners apiece. I will never forget that. But it was interesting because
Oh, the best steak you ever had, John.
the best steak I ever had. And not only that, but because we were trapped in our tents at 19,000 feet by a serious storm, we were trapped in our tent. Uh, we, uh, we, we were thought to be lost because we were expected to be lost anyway. So when nobody saw us, and what they saw was our tracks disappearing into avalanche debris. Because after all, avalanches fell every day, so our tracks are always covered with avalanche debris. So when they saw our tracks heading into avalanche debris, they thought we were dead. There were headlines in 1963 in every newspaper in the country that the Harvard team had been wiped out on Mount McKinley, now Denali. Uh, and so when we walked into that restaurant and claimed our steaks, we had been up on the mountain then for 38 days. We were burnt black from the sun, unshaven, filthy, and we stopped into that restaurant. People fell out of their chairs as if we were ghosts because we were dead, but we weren't dead. Yeah,
They
it was
thought you were dead.
it was great, and it just further increased my passion for adventure. When I
Yeah,
graduated,
and
sorry, go
John,
ahead.
and high stakes adventure, when you describe climbing that north wall with avalanches all around you, and you've got like a narrow ravine that you're going up, and you're that one moment when the avalanche is coming down and rocks are flying all around you, your friend is like safe behind a boulder watching you not get hit by these rocks. It's just I just can't imagine how close you came to death there. And then you had that other incident with the cornice that falls out beneath your feet and you're hanging there in the air, but you're able to, I guess, grab with your ice pick fast enough not to fall to your death.
Well, you read my memoir. Thank you very much. But yeah, the very first the first real brush with death was I was climbing as a lead. There were 7 of us, and we every day 2 of us would go out and push the route up the next segment. I was climbing with Dave Roberts, who became one of America's premier adventure writers. Anyway, Dave and I were had climbed up. An ice fall that was at the most dangerous part of the climb. It was necessary if we were gonna get killed, we had to climb up a very narrow buttress, which had some hope of avalanches bouncing off, as I said, to the left or the right, but as long as we stayed on that buttress, it might miss us, okay? But it turned out that that buttress and the minimum safety that it offered didn't go all the way down the glacier where our base camp, and so, climb the first part of it, part of the climb by going straight up an ice fall. That was where the avalanche actually hit. And every day we could see these massive avalanches, and I mean they were something. A block of ice would fall off. I mean, a block of ice as big as a house would fall off at 14,000 feet, and then fall 2 miles straight down into the avalanche bowl and over the ice fall. And it was so massive that even though our tents were a half a mile away, the wind up falling ice could flatten the tent. I mean, that's how massive they were. But when we discovered that the relative safety of this buttress we wanted to climb didn't extend all the way down, we had no choice either to give up the climb or to climb straight up the ice fall where the avalanches came and then dash quickly to the relative safety on the left side. Well, we weren't stupid. We spent 3 days with pencil and paper charting where when the avalanches fell, because the avalanches fell at a certain time. They fell when the sun hit the ice cliffs and melted a little bit, and then loosened the ice, or they fell the opposite when the refreeze started, and the refreeze cracked the ice and started avalanches. So we figured out that there were a couple safe hours when we might climb without an avalanche, and that was from about 2 to 3 o'clock in the morning. Since this was Alaska in the middle of summer, there really wasn't any nights. We could climb at night. So we would climb because we didn't have, modern equipment and stuff, we had to climb that ice fall 7 times, each of us, up to the top, which took 3 or 4 hours, and then we had to dash 45 for 15 minutes right back into across the avalanche debris, and had an avalanche hit during any of that time, we would have been wiped out. It would been like being hit by a dozen, freight trains, and we had to do it 7 times. All of us made it across that ice fall without being killed. But this brings us to the episode you brought up. Dave and I had climbed the ice wall really for the last time, and we were quite happy that we hadn't been killed because for sure, after we climbed that ice fall, an avalanche would fall right down where we had just come from, and we watched it, and survived. So we were off to the relative safety of from the avalanche. We'd pitched our tent beneath a rock cliff about 700 feet high, and we had not figured on the fact that rock cliffs are continually shedding rocks. We pitched our tent, and Dave goes out when we get up to take a leak, and he gets off to the safety of a rock wall off to the left, 100 feet away. And I'm a little slow. I noticed that there are 2 small holes in the tent, punched by small pebbles, small rocks. And then I hear the unmistakable sign of a rock fall starting from the top of the 700-foot cliff. I get out of the tent just in time to see a massive rock fall heading straight for me. There's no time to run, and so I just stand there. This rock fall comes straight at me. Some of the rocks were as big as basketballs, some of them were pebbles. Um, but this massive fall of rocks comes straight at me, and I just stand there, and they all missed me. Some of them so close they all but parted my hair. I mean, I could actually see veins of minerals in the rock, or I thought I could, as they came that close. But it was over in 3 minutes, 3 or 4 minutes, and I just stood there. Dave Roberts, in one of his books, called it the damnedest thing in the mountains he'd ever seen, that I somehow survived. Oh, we just, we're 21 years old, so we just laugh, gather up our stuff, and continue our climb. And going up, it was one adventure after the other. Another one you mentioned was climbing up these narrow ice ridges. They were very fragile, called cornices, and a cornice is where the wind is blowing so one way over a cliff, so it's like it looked like a breaking ocean wave, only it's frozen ice, but very, very fragile, and we had to go up some of these things, these cornices. Well, I'm climbing with Hank at the time, and Hank gingerly gets his way up this cornice, and I start up, um, putting my feet exactly where Hank had put his feet to minimize the danger. But it doesn't do any good. I'm a good deal heavier than Hank, and I'm halfway up, and all of a sudden, the whole cornice gives way. This massive bunch of snow and ice just gives way, and I'm standing on air like in a Roadrunner cartoon, looking down 5,000 feet of space beneath my feet. And, "Uh-oh," and I have time for one swing of my ice axe, and I swing it as hard as I can into what's left of the ice, ridge, and it bites, thank God. Uh, and it keeps me from falling or until Hank can gather the boat, slip it to a a safe anchor above me. And so I climb out of that too. But these are just 2 of the incidents, and they happen it seemed almost on a daily basis, and there were 7 of us, um, we'd fall in crevasses. We were skilled climbers, so we'd fall in a crevasse, and the others would catch us with the ropes, uh, and we tiptoed and gingerly went up the really, the dicey parts, had rope ladders, so we for a couple of the cliffs to get up them. Um, Others were climbing where we had just very narrow bridges to get up, all the while looking down south up and up and up and up until we finally get close to the top. And that's where the storm hit, and that's where the thought of the stake arose. Because we were in the middle of our tents for like 4 days. We couldn't move. Uh, and the bush pilots saw our tracks going into the avalanche debris, as I had said 5 minutes ago. So they thought we were dead, but we weren't dead on the stormy evening. We went on our way to the summit, and we're the first people to do that, and we come back down.
John, has anyone successfully hiked that north wall again since you did?
No, no, no one has, and, one person one party has tried, and they hardly got to the bottom of it before one of them was killed, falling into a crevasse, got stuck like a cork in a bottle, and took 3 hours to die. It was a friend of mine, a guy named Chris Carabrock. You look in climbing books and guides and stuff, and they all say the same thing. The Ricochet wall, which was the name of the face, is too dangerous to attempt. It's suicidal. It was climbed once, and it'll never be climbed again, and it hasn't been. It's been what is
Crazy Harvard kids that did it.
yeah, crazy Harvard kids. And by the way, your listeners or viewers can look at my website, and on the homepage you'll see at the nav bar, Denali Diary. It's a first-person memoir, illustrated memoir. I finally got around to writing just last year, and it's free. It's a download. It's called Denali Diary, and all these stories are in it. It's a great read with some great photographs. Anyway, uh,
I highly recommend it. And so, John, I when you told me about that, I sent it to a friend of mine, Lou McAvoy, and turns out I don't know if she's back yet, but she was hiking Denali when I sent her the link to your site there, your memoirs.
yeah, well, a memoir, McKinley Denali is a hard enough climb anyway, but there is a much easier route up it on the other side of the mountain, and so every summer, 20 or 30 people manage to get to the top on the easier route, and the real danger there is with the fierce mountain weather. They freeze to death or die of hypothermia or whatever, and there's still a lot of falls.
The, it, these near death experiences didn't scare you away from adventure. It just drew you in even more. You became even more addicted to the adrenaline rush. So then you embark on another hitchhiking trip. This one really astounds me because you were able to hike or hitchhike across the Middle East, which in today's modern world, there's no way that American could survive going across the areas that you went through. I think you were at the right moment to be able to do something like that, but it was still quite an adventure for you.
Well, I had just graduated, and you're right. Every adventure I had was only up the ante because I kept surviving. Whether it was drowning in the McKinley River or not getting killed by that rock fall I described, I came to the youthful belief that I was indestructible. Now, a lot of 20-year-olds think they're indestructible, as well as I do. Maybe you were one of them. I don't know. Racing cars fast or whatever. But it kind of wears off, right? As they start families and jobs and stuff. But it didn't wear off with me. It got more and more extreme. And so every time I'd survive, I would say, okay, let me up the ante and try something even more dangerous. So after I graduated college, I decided to hitchhike around the world, not the oceans, of course, but the land parts. So I took a student charter flight to Paris, and then started hitchhiking, and I got to Istanbul, and then headed for India. Uh, and I had a contract with the Boston Globe then to write basically as a correspondent, a stringer, and uh, and so I was looking for every war along the path. And in that year, 1964, there are wars in Cyprus and in Laos and the beginnings of America's war in Vietnam. So I went to all three of those wars, and because I was indestructible, where other correspondents from the major news services were cowering in hotels in the capital city, I was out there in the ground walking between the warring armies. It's like I was indestructible. So in Cyprus, for example, I'd go out, I'd wear a white shirt, maybe put a white flag, on my chest or something, and wave, so that the Greeks on one side or the Turks on the other wouldn't shoot me. But I'd walk back and forth between the lines, talking to them, taking pictures, and it made great stories. No other correspondent got that close to combating. Yeah, then I went to Laos, and I discovered that that was kind of a phony war. It was all about drugs, not about anything else, although the American government thought it was all about commies taking over. there were really 3 armies fighting in Laos. They really weren't fighting. It was all a bunch of drug lords trying to make money, and I realized that. But I went up to the battlefield and saw that it was kind of like a non-war. They were huffing and puffing, but it wasn't much of a war. The interesting part in the war in Laos was back in the capital city, Vientiane, and there was a place in Vientiane, which I think is well described in the book, uh, a combination bar and whorehouse called the Vienne Ratre, translated to the green latrine. And the leaders of all 3 armies, met there and got drunk and got stoned, uh, and I went in there. Again, now I put on some muscle and stuff, so nobody was messing with me. So I walk into this green latrine, and I wanna interview some of the generals, and I meet this guy from the CIA, who's the CIA's man in Vientiane, and he's an alcoholic, and he's not over the bar with a drink. His name was Bob, and because I'm a correspondent, everybody wants their stories told, so Bob wants to tell me his story, and so I listened to his story for half an hour, and like I say, he's an alcoholic. Why the CIA even hire him, I have no idea. Uh, but I go out of the green latrine with all kinds of crazy stories, and I get them published, and then I go to the beginning of the war, and the Army advisors, there were about 5,000 of them then in the country, and they weren't there as, combatants, they were there as advisors. They took me down to where the war was in the South Vietnam, and so I stayed with the battalion of South Vietnamese troops, and went out on patrol with them a couple times. Again, I was indestructible, so it never occurred to me that it was dangerous. Wrote some stories on and then headed down to Australia and chased girls, drank beer for a while as a mining geologist. Then I got an offer from the State Department to become a Foreign Service officer. I mean,
Oh, John, wait a second. Before you left Australia, you fell in love in Australia.
oh my goodness, you gonna bring that up? Oh, yeah, it was interesting. I have a base at the University of Adelaide in South Australia, and there I met a girl. Her name was Jean, and she was beautiful and madly in love. And the only reason I wasn't all the time in the outback was because of Jean. And we'd go camping and we just go surfing. And, it was like really strange because as I think I tried to describe, and it was hard to describe in the memoir, I I had, by that time, bec become a really tough, violent guy, and real tough, violent guys didn't have any truck with emotions. We weren't compassionate, we were violent, and our relationships with women were pretty crude. Uh and that's what I wanted to be. So the idea of falling in love and losing my self control because I was in love was really dangerous to me because it meant that somewhere in me was a soft part. And in John Graham of that era, there was no soft part. I was big and tough, and that was it. So Gene uncovered the soft part of me, and it was terrifying to discover that I had a heart. And
Were
so
you, John, were you afraid of becoming your dad at that time?
no, no, I knew that what I had done, that I was physically powerful, he never was. Uh, but at that time, I was afraid of of doing what they did when they were in love. They got married, and don't forget I came from a Catholic family. So I would get married and then probably have a couple kids, and I'd be constrained forever. I'd have to get a real job, and the adventures that had guided my life up until then would disappear, and she was a threat to all of that. But nonetheless, I'd marry her and propose, and we were gonna get married back in the States. And then as I left Australia, I realized that, that was never gonna happen. There were 2 pushes and pulls on me then, Rob. There was this incredibly powerful person, John Wayne, and I was succeeding beyond my wildest dreams at becoming John Wayne. And then there was Jean, a whole different side of my existence that I never thought about, and which was terrifying to me because it was soft to a person who had become extremely hard. Uh, and there was no question which would win out. The tough guy, John Wayne, won, and that was the end. And I never did. I basically jilted Gene, something I feel guilty about to this day, um, and joined the Foreign Service because when I was in Australia, when I was prospecting gold in the center of Australia, uh, the mining company's mail service caught up with me, and in it was a letter with a big blue eagle on it, and it was an offer for the State Department to join the Foreign Service because I passed all the exams when I was a senior in college. And so I had a choice to make. I could accept the offer, in which case I had to get rather quickly back to the United States to join the training program, or I could stay as a correspondent because I was good enough so that the Boston Globe, who was offering me a city job, and they loved my work. Or I could be a geologist. My degree was in geology and science. And so I sat there around my campfire out in the middle of nowhere, listening to the kangaroos uh, and thinking about my choice. And I was, like I say, I was in nowhere. If you put your finger in the center of Australia, that's where I was. A place called Tennant Creek. It had a dirt street, and I got into a barroom brawl. I remember that over points in a darts match. Darts were really big in Australia in those days. Um, yeah, and there I was. And I had this letter from the State Department. And I had to make a choice between these three possible careers, three possible life choices, and I decided I would take the offer from the State Department. I was no longer interested in science. Well, that didn't pass muster. And the idea of being a war correspondent, I mean, I was so naive then, right? So naive. I thought, well, wait a minute. I can have adventures, but a war correspondent only writes about adventures. If I'm a foreign service officer, I can cause the adventure. Right? I can be in the middle of wars and revolutions actually as a participant, not just an observer, um, because I just read Robert Michener's book, which was in which the hero was a foreign service officer. So I decided I could have everything if I'm a foreign service officer. So I decided to accept the foreign service officer, left my job in Australia, and drifted across the Pacific, stopping only briefly in places like Tahiti, and then Hawaii on the way back home. Joined the for
Did you picture John it becoming a sort of a James Bond in the Foreign Service?
Yes, I did. Whole idea would be that I would become a James Bond in the Foreign Service. Uh, and I could do that. I mean, I was smart and tough, and by that point, I had I had a body that nobody else would mess with, uh, and I was pretty good with weapons. So yeah, James Bond was what I was going to do.
Were were you drinking martinis?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, in the Foreign Service, one drank a lot. Martinis and everything else. But I joined the Foreign Service, and they didn't disappoint. After the training session, in which I spent a year, 2 years almost in Monrovia, where nothing happened, but I had to learn the trade somewhere. So I learned all the trade of being a Foreign Service officer, writing reports and all the dull stuff. But then the State Department decided that wasn't a very good use for me, sent me to Libya, and I was there during the revolution when Muammar Gaddafi came to power. And I thought, okay, this is it. This is where I become James Bond, right? Because I was one of the few Americans with good contacts with the Libyan military. That's part of my job, working at the air base out there. And so I was detailed to write the first biographic reports on Muammar Gaddafi. But we didn't know who he was. He came out of nowhere. Uh, and so I did a lot of stealthy stuff to get information on Gaddafi and wrote the first report. Interestingly enough, I quickly found out that Gaddafi was not a commie dupe. The only thing we cared about, this is 1969, the only thing we cared about was the whole war. We didn't want Libya or other countries to join the Russian Soviet Union and those, so that's all we cared about. So my first report on Gaddafi was, "No worries, the guy hates the Russians as much as he hates us." So we breathed a big sigh of relief, and the second part of my report said, "All he is he's an Islamic zealot. He's crazy mad about Islam, and that's all that matters to him." And the State Department, in stupidity, thought that was good news, not realizing that, he was the precursor to Al Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, and all the rest of it as an Islamic zealot. We thought it was good news. And so I wrote for it, and was widely praised for it. So then as my tour there was go oh, yeah, by the way, uh, in the middle of a revolution, I was the only person at the embassy who really enjoyed it. I mean, there were, cars burning in the public square, rock throwing mobs. Everybody else in the embassy was freaking out, but not me. I would I I'd look at all this and I'd say, "Yes, bring it on, bring it on." And people thought
You want to go out there and probably run through it and
I could go out there and throw rocks too. And so, the State Department then noticed that it had hired, a really funny guy, a quirky guy who actually seemed to enjoy violence and was really good at it. So they said, "Okay, we're gonna send you to the war in Vietnam." And I told them, "Oh, okay, I'll go, but I want you to send me to the most difficult, the most dangerous assignment you've got." In Vietnam. Now, I went as a civilian because there were civilian jobs in Vietnam connected to an outfit called FORD, Civil Operations Rural Development Support. And we did a lot of things that were helpful. I mean, like building schools and fish ponds and stuff. But by far the greater part of my job was as a political officer, reporting on the Viet Cong and doing a lot of intelligence, counterintelligence work. And yeah, it was damn dangerous. I was sent as advisor to the city of Hue. Some of your listeners may remember Hue as the site of the infamous Tet massacre of 1968, and so I arrived there a couple of years later as the advisor to the city, only 50 miles south of the demarcation line that then separated North Vietnam from South. So yeah, it was damn dangerous, and every day I didn't know if it'd be the last one or not. I was a ready target for assassination, car bombs, and the rest of it. And so I really enjoyed it because it was, like I say, damn dangerous. But I hadn't counted on it becoming really dangerous, and that's when the North Vietnamese invaded in
yeah,
1970.
the stories you tell in your book, John, you can just tell how harrowing it is. And I've read a fair amount about the Vietnam War and things that were going on, and it had to be incredibly scary times. So I don't know that you were scared. Still, you were the adrenaline junkie. What what was the status of your faith through all of this? Your adrenaline junkie years. You know, you grew up Catholic. Was there any faith element you felt like you were invincible? Did you feel like God was protecting you?
You raise a big question, and I wrestled for that through the entire memoir. Oh, no, I'd lost my Catholic faith really at Harvard, which is exactly what my mother's priest said I would happen. It happened. And so, the only faith I had was faith in myself. It was a self-faith, that I was indestructible. Uh, and about God, well, I remember when I survived the near drowning in the McKinley River coming back from that mountain climb, and I was beaten up because I'd been knocked out on the bottom of the river, and, so I was sort of like laying on the riverbank, and my buddies were heating up some tea and tending to my scratches and bruises. I remember laying on that riverbank saying, "What the hell? This is about the 10th time that I have survived a near miss. Why, when so many other young men are getting killed, I'm not getting killed? Why is that? Why is that?" And I began to raise that question, and it kept it was a backdrop for all my subsequent adventures. In Algeria, for example, um, I got a ride with a guy in an old truck, and we were riding along in his truck. He was a French guy who had not yet fled into France. God knows what he was doing there. But we're driving along, and he starts sliding his hand up my shorts, and so I hit him, and he hits me back. I grab the car door and grab my rucksack and jump. And luckily, it's the one small stretch in 100 miles where there's soft sand on the side of the road. So I land in the soft sand and am barely scratched. So I'm thinking, at that McKinley River, why is it that I keep surviving all this stuff? And I didn't have an answer. I didn't have an answer for a long time. But like I say, it was a constant theme. Why was I being protected? And it turned out the answer I finally came to was that I was being protected because there was a quid pro quo. It wasn't luck. And to this day, I don't believe in luck. I was being protected. There was something I was supposed to be doing with my life that I wasn't doing. And until I found it, I would keep having these misses as messages that I better shape my life around and turn to what my life was about. I didn't get that. I didn't get that, and it was a worrisome, niggling thing, uh, to every adventure that followed, including hitchhiking around the world, and then the revolution in Libya, and then especially the war in Vietnam. But it came to a head in the Battle of Vietnam. Now, you may remember Vietnam fell in 1975, but the North Vietnamese tried to, uh, to take all of South Vietnam in 1972, so-called Easter Offensive, and they began by pouring across the DMZ, which demilitarized, which, as I said, was only 50 miles from where I was. And so the South Vietnamese forces basically broke and ran. They weren't very good. A few battalions stayed to fight. The rest of them fled. Half of the leaders of the city of Hue also took one look north at the advancing tanks and troops from the North Vietnam, and they fled too. So the city was basically ungovernable. Um, the North Vietnamese quickly came and surrounded Hue on the north and on the west. They were about to take the city, and my life was again at stake because there were no American troops there. This was after Nixon and Kissinger had agreed to troop withdrawal, so they withdrawn all the U.S. military. The troop withdrawal agreement, in all great wisdom, the Nixon administration, for which I have little respect, uh, the great wisdom of the Nixon administration didn't include civilians. Oh, there were just a handful of civilians left in the way, no military, and 20,000 North Vietnamese troops, 6, 10 miles away, about to advance on the city. They could still send a helicopter. The U.S. could still send a helicopter north from Da Nang, but that wouldn't work because the helicopter would be mobbed by Vietnamese, including all my counterparts, and I'd have to shoot them off the skids. And so helicopters weren't an option. So my life depended on the city not falling. Now, what I could see, any fool could see, that the real problem in this city was that there was no government because the leaders had fled, and it was being terrorized by deserters from the South Vietnamese army who were scared out of their wits and acting badly, raping and looting and pillaging. They'd set fire to the marketplace. And there was a pall of heavy black smoke over all this chaos, and South Vietnamese artillery was crashing and booming, and people were screaming. And I and a couple other Americans who were left in the city, as Americans, realized that I mean, it was like a scene from Kafka. It was incredible. It was most incredible night evening of my life, um, to see, these screaming people heading south on the one road into Da Nang, crowding the road, looters in the marketplace, ammunition couldn't get north to the battalions still fighting because the looters had blocked the streets, and ammunition trucks couldn't drive through the blockades, and so I went to the mayor's office. He had the guts not to run, and I slammed my fist down on his desk and demanded he set up a firing squad. And I think this is well documented in my book. Uh, all of a sudden, between swings of my fist on this man's desk, it hit me. After all these adventures, all this mindlessness, it hit that I was then demanding that one set of Vietnamese start shooting second set of Vietnamese, the deserters, in the firing squad, so they could get together and shoot a third set of Vietnamese, which was the advancing North Vietnamese troops. And my home was 6,000 miles away. I didn't give a damn about the war. I knew it was lost. I also thought it was wrong and evil and stupid. I was only there because of the now, when I was climbing the Ricochet wall, yeah, there were adventures, but only my life was at stake, or maybe the guy on the other end of the rope. But it wasn't like Vietnam where I was no longer a kid. I was 29 years old, and I was a senior person, and decisions I was making were having life and death consequences. I mean, that's what setting up a firing squad was. And here I was, not believing in any of this shit, not believing in the war. I was only there because of my own adventure. And it suddenly hit me how shallow that was. That my
You
adv
realize, John, you're just sort of morally bankrupt and no real compass other than your own adventure.
yes, that's exactly right. There was no real compass to my life except my own adventure, and it was intolerable. I finally realized that my life had become that shallow, that I had become a moral monster, um, and, uh, and that I was a threat to everything else. I didn't give a damn about the war. I didn't give a damn about the poverty and disease I witnessed on a daily basis. I didn't care about other people. I didn't care about community. All I cared about was myself, and I was almost 30 years old, and I couldn't go on like that. I remember in the middle of this mess, this incredible chaos, that night in Hue with the advancing North Vietnamese army and the crashing of the artillery and the screams of people and the breaking glass and the smoke over the marketplace. I remember thinking, "Oh my God, what have I got myself into? I have to stop doing this."